In tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm François Pointeau. I'm your host for tonight. This is Malvern Multiverse. We do this every fourth Tuesday of the month, and I invite two wonderful poets as we have here tonight. And we'll be doing it again next month, and we won't do it in December, and then we'll be back in January for the full new year. So today I invited ire'ne Silva and Alan Altimont. They both work with language, not just with modern American language, but Alan is translating a medieval French poet who wrote in Latin. Ire'ne writes bilingually, English and Spanish. And I thought it would be great to two completely different experiences, but entirely to do with culture and language and how that translates to us, modern America. And so we're going to start with Alan. Alan was my poetry professor, let's say 5 years ago.
Yeah, something like
that. So, in the early 90s.
I'll vouch for that.
Yeah, and he accepted me into his class, and I was a real kind of a piece of shit.
And, you're still telling lies.
I actually forced Alan to read a whole book of poems before I would go and be part of his class, because I was that proud of my own crap.
You were testing me.
I still have that book with Alan's notes that are incredibly generous and incredibly kind. And so, Alan Altimont, thank you so much for being a great professor, and thank you for coming here tonight.
Thank you, Francis. It's really great to be here. This is such a great, relatively new institution here in our fair city. After so many private bookstores went down the tubes, a couple decades ago, beginning there. So it's wonderful to see this place here, and it's such a warm, inviting place. I really, I haven't come here enough. Sorry, gang. But I will be trying to come here much more often now. So I am doing translations from medieval Latin, and that's a long story about how I got into that, which I won't bore you with. But I found a poet that is virtually unknown in the English-speaking world, and I began translating his work for students to read because I was going to teach in France for a while, and I was teaching in the same city that this person had lived in, and so I became fascinated with his work, and I find a lot of it really delightful and strangely modern in interesting ways. In fact, I'm gonna read at least two poems here that I think are utterly unique in the whole medieval canon in any language at all. And so I know that's probably esoteric for many of you, and it might even be so what, which I understand, but I hope I'm able to bring them into an English that is familiar to you too. At the same time, trying to preserve the intellect and the culture and even some of the poetic devices that were used by this poet. And we're going back with this guy he's born in 1035, died in 1123, lived in the west of France, became a priest, an educator, a bishop finally, but was not celibate. And he writes love poems to women and to men both. And then he was faced in his older years as he became a bishop with having to give up his sex life. Celibacy was enforced in France during his lifetime, and as a bishop he had to be part of that move to enforce celibacy. So he writes poems about what it feels like to try to give up that whole part of yourself. You'll see he's kind of ribald and randy. But here's a poem this is a nice short one, and it feels very modern to me. It's called The Blue Glass Vase, and I've dedicated this to an old colleague of mine, Brother George Clowder, whose voice I hear in this poem. There's a market I always honed in on while strolling through Rome. One day, browsing for novelties, I found a blue glass vase. The stall keeper, a dunce, was using it to hold incense. The incense my partner bought for 9 pieces of silver. For the vase, I doled out 3.5 pieces of gold. I worried how I'd manage bringing it home undamaged, so I found a nice wicker basket for the right price. The vase was flawless going in, I infallibly recall. To my grief and horror, out it came with a hairline fracture. Guests of mine would have known how to appreciate my find if they'd seen it as it was when I packed it away, pristine. But the mover manhandled it. May he never find a treasure. This poet's name, by the way, which you've almost certainly never heard of, is Marbode. Marbode of Rennes. Here's a poem. We don't know if this is to a man or to a woman, but this will give you a little taste of him writing about a certain kind of desire, and also about poetry too. To a far-off friend. During the last 5 years since I've returned to my old haunts, I've penned more than a few little poems for you. Little, to be sure, though just as sweet as you could have wished for. I've sent my best tidbits at your every request. Since you ask, look, we give. And since you ask this and are loved so much, my lightweight poems sprint to your home. And I want to thrill you, since I don't want not to thrill you. And I do not lack love, so I want you not to, too. Though I've rhymed against your forgetting for such a long time, words still come anew to me, burning to rekindle you. Now, one of the things that he wrote that made him famous during his own lifetime, to the extent that anyone in the 11th century could have literary fame at all, was something that, for me, I thought, I don't want to translate this. It's a book of gemstones, all in poems, you know? But then the more I read about it, the more I thought there are 140 manuscripts that survive of this thing, which means it was a hit. For hundreds of years, it was a hit. After his lifetime, it was translated into 9 languages. And so the more I looked at these things, the more sort of charming I found them to be. And many of them are really more about people than about the stones they purport to be about. So here's one on what he would have called lodestone, or the English at that time would have called lodestone, but magnets or magnetite. And you'll see how the medieval mind deals with the notion of the magnet. Lodestone is commonly found in the far-off lands of the cavemen. India, no less fertile a producer, also exports it. Known far and wide for its rusty coloration, the lodestone also draws iron nearby to it by some force in its nature. Deendor, the magus, is said to have been the first one to do this, knowing no other magical power would be as impressive. After that, it is said, the famously tempting sorceress, Circe, used it to conjure up her animalistic enchantments. Then, when it came to be used among the wizards of Persia, one of the wisest discovered lodestone has powers yet greater. Anxious to know for sure his bride-to-be would be true, he placed one under her pillow while she was deeply asleep. And soon enough, she who had been chaste was seeking out sexual partners rather recklessly. Each of her lovers fell out of her bed as soon as he started fucking her, just as if he'd been punched, the lodestone fingering every one of the crimes of this cheater. And he goes, this is a priest. So now I love this. Say a thief picks the lock of a house full of fine things and money. Once within, he should toss burning coals in every room and liberally strew all over all of them finely ground fragments of lodestone, so that the heat of the fumes wafts to the house's 4 corners, twisting the residents' minds into thinking they're facing destruction, sending the lot of them scampering off in every direction, leaving the thief unfettered to haul off whatever he wishes. So a little criminal, advice there. Lodestone's force can reconcile a man with his wife, and even, vice versa, sway wives to give their men second chances. Lodestone builds character, also makes speakers much more persuasive, spices up conversation, and sharpens critical thinking. Taken mixed with honey, it purges an excess of fluids. Sprinkled over terrible burns, it leaves them less painful. Another one of those, or is that enough? This is pearls, or unions. Unforgettable is the gemstone formed in an oyster called a union, because only one can be plucked from each one, and never are two or more at the same time found in one oyster. Eagerly sought for their lustrous white beauty to serve as adornments, unions, perfect for clothing, are perfect as well in gold settings. Oysters, when the urge strikes them, are said to lay themselves open, gaping up to the heavens, and taking in dew from on high, by means of which they conceive their shining, plump little treasures. Unions conceived with morning dew are at birth somewhat brighter. Dew of the evening tends to spawn a tawnier offspring. Oysters in their prime bear pearls that are actually gleaming. Those whose best days have passed will give birth to pearls much less lustrous. Those that drink in greater share of the atmosphere's moisture generate pearls proportionately brighter and plumper. None, though, known to have grown any bigger than half of a walnut. Just when the vaults of heaven are shaken by thunder and lightning, oysters close tight with fear in a flash and scurry away, thus wasting, because they have interrupted conception, the dews, the precious pearls just starting to grow within them, aborted. Pearls of great price are born in India's bountiful ocean. Brittany as well gives birth to pearls long thought priceless. He always has these little bits of advice about where to find these things. And I assume that, part of what was going on with a book like that, and there were many of these sorts of books out there, by the way, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, was that the gemstones were thought to have, magical powers, and so the elites, the nobility, the royals, the bishops, the church itself, adorned themselves with these things, and they were emblems of power, basically, different kinds of power, too. So, let's see, how are we doing for time?
I think, I haven't looked at time, I think you can do at least one more.
Okay, well, if it's only one more, let me see. I'm going to read what I think is a great poem, a great medieval poem. And it's not my translation, it's the poem, the original poem. This is, at least in my knowledge of medieval literature, the only poem that in poetry tries to give us a sense of what aesthetic experience is like. And this is called, or my translation of the title is, How My Pleasures Were Ruined. To relax, I often come to hear the harp's deep thrum, which drives off, whenever I want, the draining cares of life. My harpists know Lord of the lyre, and song know Apollo, but sounds nearly as fine to my ear as that divine musician who fills the heavens with harmony by his skill. He plays and sings tonight the song of an unfortunate knight fate has felled and torn away from his beloved, who mourns, and every single word she gasps stabs my mind like a sword. Song pours from the harp's shell at his touch, weeping, filling the hall, and my heart swells with tears in tune with the harp's sad spell. From the dust, the maiden tries to lift these limbs downcast, already lifeless, already ashen from a lance head's gash. Struggling to clasp his body tight in her arms, she collapses under the weight, losing her senses, losing her sight. Coming too fast, she assails her face with bloodied fingernails, blurts out things sprawled in the dirt I have no wish to recall. I can barely stand repeating what set her hopeless weeping. Already in the hold of death, mouth, eyes, expression ice cold, she vows to remember as she knew them warm before, and rains down kisses that once woke him from sleep's deep abyss. I'll never forget what she moaned, wiping the blood from his wounds. I'll never forget her surprise at those dry lips and glazed eyes. My boy makes me feel this is not merely a song, but real. And as he plays on, voice twines with harp string in his song almost as tightly as the maiden with her lost knight. I'm moved, my heart reeling through a whole host of feelings, and I know I felt whatever he played, caress or blow. And that is how strong emotion for me trumped mere diversion. This thing which, while it grips me, wipes out its opposite. A mindless diversion now become a gripping passion. Yeah, and that, you know, for those of you who haven't read a lot of medieval poetry, I'll just say that one thing about it is that except for the later stuff, you don't know much about the poets at all. In fact, the poets are kind of invisible in the poem. But Marbeau is not that way at all. He's very visible in his poems, and that's part of what attracts me to him and makes him very interesting to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. That was awesome.